Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everybody, we are from group number 2. In this occasion, we will present material about narrative text. Beforehand, I will introduce the member of this group. The first is Agni, the second is Annisa Azhari Amanda, the third is Della Widyandari, the fourth is Entin Sehartini, and the last is Lazulpa Nabila.
Definition of narrative text. Narrative text is a story with complication or problematic events, and it tries to find the resolution to solve the problems. An important part of narrative text is the narrative mode, the set of methods used to communicate the narrative through a process narration. The narrative text also is a text that tells about something that is visited house and only in the form of essay from the writer only. The purpose of narrative text. The purpose of narrative text is to amuse or to entertain the reader with a story, and the use of the narrative text itself has several purposes, such as entertaining, educating, telling, conveying the author's experience, or as a medium to develop the imagination of the reader. Example of narrative text such as folklore, fairy tales, or fables that are legendary from all parts of the world. Although the narrative text is generally imaginative, some narrative text is also factual.
The types of narrative text. The first is personal experience, is a story in the form of personal experience. The second, science fiction, is a form of speculative fiction which primarily discusses the imagined influence of science and technology on society and individuals. The third, legend. Legend is a story that has long been famous in society and can be said as a history or not believe it as something that actually happened in the past. Generally, do not believe it because there is evidence of a legacy that is still left. For example, the legend of Keong Mas from East Java, and then the legend of the origin of Talaga Warna, West Java. 4. Myth. Myth is a story related to the occult which tells the origin of a culture which is usually managed by supernatural beings such as gods and so on. For example, Nyi Roro Kidul and Jawa Taru. 5. Fable. Fable is a story that uses animal characters in it. The purpose of the readers is to be able to entertain the readers only. Besides that, the fable also contains various moral values to be conveyed. For example, the attitude of please, help, and other. For example, Evil Frog and Adventure Mouse. 6. Short stories. Short stories are one type of story that is fictional or just imaginary. Anyone can make a story in the form of this short story because it comes from the various results that someone gets. 7. Fairy tales is a folk stories that are usually referred to as fairy tales or children's story, which contain a lot of sophistication in the characters and often contain moral message. For example, the story of a princess who remembers the frog.
Hello everybody. Number 4 is the characteristic of narrative text. First, concrete and real concept. Second, may give and say for own life or interest. Third, story can have personal meaning. 4. Key vocabulary of a noun. 5. Familiarities makes prediction easier. 6. Many based on common, even from life. 7. Purpose is to entertain or share experience. 8. Dialogues make text less concept dense. 9. Simple vocabulary. 10. Cause and effect noun. 11. People-oriented. 12. Chronological structure. 13. Simple concepts. And the last, familiar story type. And then, number 5 is the generic structure of narrative text. The first, orientation, is just about the opening paragraph where the character of the story are introduced. The second, complication. Complication where the problems in the story develop. The third, resolution. Resolution is where the problems in the story is solved. And the last, coda or reorientation, is lesson from the story.
Okay guys, next to point 6. It's about how to create narrative text. What should we do to make or write narrative text? 1. Understand in advance what is narrative text. Previously, we have known what is narrative text, purpose of narrative text, types of narrative text, characteristic and generic structure of narrative text. So, you must have understood what narrative text is. 2. Know and follow the rules that must be in the narrative text. 3. Plan out what you are going to write, and then write the text. Next, rules in narrative text. You must know these rules before write narrative text. 1. The action verb used must be past tense. 2. Use certain nouns to write down pronouns or people, object, or animals in the story. 3. Use adjectives that make up phrase, such as long blonde tail, small black nose, etc. 4. Use connective and conjunction to make the event is organized. 5. Use adverb and adverbial phrase to show the location where the event occurred, such as beneath the ocean, on the mountain, etc. Next, make a plan. To create a plan, we can divide the paper into 3 parts. 1. Beginning. In the beginning section, aims to introduce the setting, main character, and the problem. 2. Middle part. To attempt the main character to solve the problem that's filed. 3. End part. Third attempt that solve the problem. Next, let's write narrative text. Here, what some writers get into trouble, because when you go to start your story, it can be hard to write that first sentence. This is 4 ways you can start a story. So, you must have determined these 4 things. 1. Action. Action to describe what the character is doing. 2. Dialogue. This is the most important thing, because in narrative text, there must always be dialogue. 3. Setting. Setting to confirm where and when the incident occurred. 4. Song. The example. She drinks iced tea in front of me. Next, we write a beginning part. The beginning part to introduce C as V. C for character, S for setting, V for problem. Setting in here is setting time, setting place, and setting situation. Next, we write the middle part. the middle part is T-FET, T-I-E-F-E-T. T for transition, I, idea. How are you going to try to solve the problem? E, event action. What action take place? F, failure. Why don't this work? E, emotion. How do you feel when this fails? G, the transition. Example, I had to think of something else. And this is the last part. In this section, we call ties. T for transition. I for idea. How are you going to try to solve the problem? E for event action. What action take place? E, emotion. How do you feel when this fails? And then S, solution. How do you finally solve the problem? Okay, it is ways for how to create narrative text. So, happy writing!
How to analyze the narrative text. First, make sure you understand the story well. Look up a noun, word, and highlight sentences that are important. Also, think about whether the story contains some symbols that are essential for your analysis. The easiest part of analysis is usually the setting. The author likes to describe it directly or not mention it at all. However, your job is to note where and when the story takes place. Sometimes, for example, the social environment is relevant to the plot. The plot is like the structure of the story: exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and the resolution are the pillars on which the story is built. Usually in a short story, you will find only one scene or an event which impact the protagonist in some way. Is the plot linear, chronological, or does it change? These questions should help you understanding the story. Let's take, for example, Cinderella. The exposition is where we discover the everyday life of her. The action rises when Cinderella gets invited to the ball but is not allowed to attend it. However, she rebelled against her stepmother and meets the prince anyway. The climax is when she leaves at midnight, losing a glass slipper in the fortress. The consequence of this event is that the prince says that he will marry the woman whose foot fits in the slipper. The slipper fits only Cinderella's foot. The resolution is Cinderella and the prince get married. End of the story. Now that you are familiar with the plot, you are also familiar with the character. There are two types of that. Flat character, for example, Cinderella's stepmother. Cinderella's stepmother doesn't change throughout the story at all. On the other hand, Cinderella, who starts as a poor servant but ends up as a rich princess. This change can be external or internal, where the character's mind to change. Sometimes there's an antagonist is typical for them, that their personality is opposite of protagonist. How writers reveal their character. Their personality traits can be expressed directly or indirectly. Indirectly, when there is a sentence like "he was a great liar," then it's a direct commentary from the author about the character, but you can get to know the character far better from the indirect characteristic. how the characters speak, argue, and thinks. What is the character afraid of? How does the character show emotion? What does the character think about themselves? What are their quirks and perks? Unfortunately, not all questions can be answered about every character in the most short stories. The reaction to one single event is all the information you get. It's important to recognize what is it, when this, and how does the character behave in that situation. Always remember, only what can be proved with lines can be interpreted in. The main character battles mostly with an external conflict. The same external conflict that can be in a novel can also appear in short story. Basically, it's a conflict with an outside force. The internal conflict happens in the character mind. It's usually a difficult decision, denial. For example, dealing with trauma. It studies the human psychology. There are generally 4 types of point of view. The most commonly used is the third-person limit. Themes are like the general ideas that make up the story. There are really many of them. For example, is romanticism. Nature was a popular theme. Every writer has a unique style with the help of which they create the atmosphere in their story. Tone in which they write set the mood. You can ask yourself whether the story is easily readable to you. If so, the author used probably a common language, short sentence, or a wake-up that is modern. Don't forget to identify a literature device and explain their meaning. All in all, your analysis should be divided into 3 parts. The first one is the introduction with a topic sentences where you write the name of the author, title, text type. The second part belongs a short summary where we answer W question. Also, you have to analyze the story with the help of the mentioned aspect and try to connect your readings. And the last, in conclusion, you can give your own opinion to the story. Don't forget to use the present tense.